Good morning. It's so great to be here. React Alicante in Spain. It's my first time, and it's a beautiful city, really. I mean, the beaches, the people, the food. It's really an honor to be here. My name is TEJAS. That's pronounced like contagious. I know it's Spain, and we think it's TEJAS. It's not. I am not roof tiles. I've been confused for roof tiles, but it's TEJAS, and I run a small but effective developer relations consultancy. And in some capacity, I've had the wonderful opportunity to work at a number of these companies, either as a consultant or as an employee, and it's just been a great ride. That's not what we're here to talk about. Although, if you have questions about DevRel or something, come see me after. I'm here today and tomorrow. Today we're here to talk about React, the good parts. And I can understand how this title may seem a little bit controversial, because it implies that there's bad parts to React. And the truth is there are. I think with any software tool, there's positives and negatives, right? But the motivation for this talk is to bring us back to React's intent. Why was React made? Leaving aside the criticisms, leaving aside the fact that use effect is difficult, leaving aside the fact that the virtual DOM is slow, right? What is the intention of React? And if we zoom back to like 2013 when React was introduced, the mantra was ideally we write things once declaratively, we deploy them everywhere, right? That's kind of the drive. React pioneered this thinking around view equals f of s. View is just a function of state. React pioneered the component model, which we still use today in Solid, in Quick, in Astro, in Svelte, in Vue, everywhere, right? So the motivation behind this talk is to remember those things and to respond to some of the, albeit valid, criticism of React today, okay? This is a primer for you to get into why React is good and what valid criticisms exist today. But before we get into that, let's just do a quick demo of the good stuff that React invented. This is going to be really short, but I think it's worth just kind of looking at together. So really basic, we're going to do a counter. This talk is full of counters, okay? We have an index. Oh, you can't see my screen. This was supposed to be mirrored. Oh, wow, I can mirror to like other people in the audience's laptops. That's a new feature. Ideally, it's perfect. Okay, so what we're going to see is a couple demos. We have an HTML document, really nothing special. There's a root node and there's index.tsx. Let's create a counter the way we used to do it before React existed, okay? Actually, this isn't that, because before React existed, we used to write HTML, to use the platform. Now JavaScript runs everything. Dark mode. Now JavaScript, at some point, because I'm black, I'll just be teeth. But now JavaScript runs everything. So how would we do it? Let's go, const. Should we do const? This is already a question, but let's do const div, and we'll document.create element div. Literally, this is what React does under the hood, and the goal is to write code that React saves us from. And again, I just want to do a counter, okay? We'll make a div, and inside it we'll do const. Actually, we'll say div.inner text is 0. This is the basis of our counter. We'll do some buttons, so we'll do const increment button. You kind of get the idea. We probably won't spend too much time here, because even GitHub Copilot knows what I'm trying to do, right? We'll just do this. We'll change this to decrement button. We'll just say decrement. And last thing we need to, we'll just append this. I think the API may work like, okay, it doesn't. Oh, does it? TypeScript doesn't agree, but let's see what happens. I haven't used this API in a very, very long time. So we'll npx vite, we'll go to the browser and see what we have. And of course, the API doesn't work this way, so let's just come back here, and we'll append increment button, decrement button. Again, tiny little exercise. We won't spend more than 5 minutes on this, but I think it's important to recognize the value that React gives us. Okay, something's not working, it's to be expected, and there's absolutely nothing in the console. Wow. I'm not referencing the file. Look at that. Great. Okay, so now ideally we have something. We navigate it to blank, so we'll go to localhost 5173. Okay, so we have something. We clearly messed up setting our text content for increment. This is TypeScript, but we're still making mistakes. Okay, and it kind of works, right? The next thing we need to do is actually make the buttons handle events. We'll do this just maybe for the increment button to save some time, right? But we can do something like increment button dot add event listener. Click. Thank you, Copilot. Oof, this is AI-driven development. Isn't that awesome? We can just do this decrement button -1. Ideally, this kind of should work. Let's go back to our thing. Okay. Yeah, this works, right? We implemented a counter, but look at this. There's so many problems inherently with this. For example, it's hard to componentize, it's hard to reuse, it's hard to test. How do you test this? It's so full of side effects because we're like manipulating the DOM. We can't represent our components as discrete functions. React showed up, right, with JSX, and if we were to implement something really simple, it would be, we've all probably written this in some way, shape, or form. We'll say, something like count, set count is use state of 0, and we'll return, look at this beautiful thing, right? We have div, and we'll do count. And maybe we're using too many divs, maybe we're not, but, discussion for another time. But in terms of syntax, syntax alone, we have some clear benefits, count +1 and count -1. I mean, if we compare these side by side, I think, the good parts of React kind of start to become evident, right? This is, look, I think this may be lost on some people. This is a function. This is a function that we can export, that we can test, that we can mock. It's not really doing anything inherently side effectful. Use state is, internally, maybe some effects are there. It doesn't matter. In your mental model, you're able to reason about components way, way better, right? And so this is the value proposition of React. And we need to establish that as the basis of our discussion, okay? So, was that applause? It should be. Thank you. How do you say cheers in Spanish? Salud. God bless coffee. Okay, so I don't want to spill that. So React has saved us syntax. React has helped us reason about components, structurally create sound components that are testable and free of effects, at least in our mental model. There's been some criticism about React lately. How many of you have seen this on? Wow, not a lot of people. That's good. I'm apparently in a hate bubble. A lot of people have issues about React lately, and we'll talk about those and debunk them. But a lot of the issues come from people who find issues with things in general. For example, okay, this company is just world-renowned for its design. They just had an event. They made titanium phones, and the vast majority are like, okay, that's cool. But there's people who go like, oh, who asked for this? They haven't innovated in years. And I'm not picking sides one way or another, but everything has critics, and that's fair. Still, sometimes the best design company in the world, does things that you go like, oh. And imagine someone made an Apple car picture where you turn the car upside down and plug it in. And so React, as good as it is, has some of these moments, and that's what we're here to talk about today. But part of the reason I'm giving this talk is to silence maybe potentially harmful opinions about React. Things like this, right? I think this kind of discourse just doesn't really belong in the React community. Because we've all made good money off React, to be fair. Many of us have jobs in the space, many of us want jobs in the space, and even if it's not about money, it's about engineering. And React has fundamentally solved a lot of problems, as we just saw and as we will see. In fact, I saw this and I was a little bit triggered, so I wrote a giant, I couldn't help myself. But let's zero in on the criticisms of React. What do people complain about, by and large? And again, I run a consultancy that does DevRel, so it's important for us to listen to the community. I'm here listening to each and every one of you that I come across, okay? What do people complain about with React? Complaint number one is performance. React is slow, and I can say this, that today React, in terms of UI libraries, React is the slowest of the lot, period. No question. I mean, signals, you'll see a bunch of talks about signals. Signals are a new state management primitive, new-ish, that are just faster because the reactivity is fine-grained. React itself is not reactive. Reactive programming entails that you have reactive values that subscribe to a notifier that when they are notified of an update, they change. Fine-grainedly. A great example of this is Knockout.js back in the day with observables and things. React is not reactive because it's just functions that are called again. Okay, and we'll look at that in more detail. But this is true. Svelte recently announced support for runes, which is basically signals. Angular using signals. Solid using signals. Quick using, everybody's using signals. React is just slow because of the virtual DOM. We know this. Is it worth getting aggressive about? I don't think so, and we'll look at that in more detail. Number two, a lot of people complain about the fact that you can't use React without a server. Nowadays, right? A lot of people complain that you need a framework, you need Next.js, you need Remix, and whether that's true or not, I don't know, but this is an ongoing complaint. So really, people complain about these two things quite a lot. There's also use effect that people complain about, and this, there's no defense for, in my opinion, right? Like there's an optional second argument that if you leave off, you create an infinite loop. I can't defend that. I tried my best, but I don't know. At least like a TypeScript warning or something. Anyway, so let's deal with these discreetly. First one, performance. As I mentioned, these problems are about the virtual DOM. The way the virtual DOM works is you need to have a copy of the actual DOM in memory and diff that, and then call a bunch of functions. So it's not as performant as signals on multiple levels. But by and large, the discourse is around signals and memos. So if you haven't had the chance yet to get up to speed on this, by way of a demo, I'll show you what that looks like now. What we're going to do is we're going to load a product. So we'll do npm run dev. Actually, we'll open the code first. Let's quit VS Code. And we'll look at code, and then we'll look at the code actually working. Okay? So what do we have? If we open, this is a solid JS project because solid uses signals. And here's what we have. We have a home component with main. It renders a counter. And then it renders a component called component. And this component is a UL, an unordered list, of 10,000 elements of math.random. Okay? So I want you to keep this in mind. And we'll just go ahead and run this code. And concurrently, we'll run the React equivalent of this. Now, Solid.js and React have almost identical syntax. They're the same-ish. We'll look at that. So what does our counter look like? Let's open the browser, and let's go side by side. So we'll open the Solid project here. I think it's 5174. Oh, OK. Where are you? It's 3000. There we go. OK, this is a Solid project. And then we'll open the React project here. For some reason, they both open on port 3000. So I don't know which one is which. So we'll open a new one on port 3001 just for posterity. This is the React project, okay? And we'll add them to split view. I'm using the Arc browser here, which is just great for demos. So on the left, we have React. On the right, we have Solid. And the code, as you saw, is the same across both. We have a home component that renders a counter, a button to increment the counter, and a component of 10,000 random values, okay? So let's look at React first. If I go to React and I click on increment, all 10,000 of my components re-render. And this is kind of the performance problem people are talking about. Whereas in Solid, with signal, this is a signal here. So if I do this, it kind of works as you'd hope, right? What's the difference? Let's look at both projects in the context of code. So if we open the React project, and we'll open this to this side, we'll do Solid on the other side. Okay, so as you can see, the code, let's zoom out maybe one level. As you can see, the code is really, really similar, except here it's use state from React, here it's create signal from Solid, but like it's almost the same. The difference is in Solid you have create signal, and when you read a signal, it's a function call instead of just a discrete identifier. What this function call is doing in Solid is it's not just returning you the value, it's implicitly subscribing that piece to this observable, store of sorts, right? And so this implicit subscription gives you fine-grained reactivity. And then when you set it, it notifies all subscribers, hey, this little piece has changed, right? Fine-grained reactivity. There's more talks about this in detail throughout the conference, the next one actually. So we'll get into more detail there. But in the case of React, what's happening, I think this is interesting, because when you set count, a couple things happen. If you think about a call stack, you call set count, it changes the value. Then you call home, and then home calls its children, which is component. Component calls math.random 10,000 times. It's functions calling each other, right? And that's what people complain about. You don't get the function, in Solid, for example, with signals, this home function is never called more than once, right? That's the value. Computationally, it is faster and arguably better. But how can we actually solve the problem in React? And we just have to be a little bit more mindful. We do this, And that's it. We have exactly the same behavior in React and in Solid now. And of course, this is a vast oversimplification, right? If I increment, we have the fine-grained reactivity because I'm memoing. And so the complaint then becomes, okay, so I have to think about memo when with Solid, I just get this for free. Yes. But when you're using a tool, you have to think. This doesn't mean with Solid you don't have to think about things. With Solid, you have a whole other set of things to think about, right? So this isn't inherently bad about React. It's just a different way of using a tool. Further, React is working on a compiler that will look at your code and at build time just add memo intelligently. Is this AI? I don't know. But they add memo like wherever it feels memo should be, ultimately giving you the same fine-grained reactivity from Solid. So is that worthy of hate? Is that considered an anti-pattern with React? I don't frankly think so, because there's ways to get the outcomes you want if you look at the tool and consider its nuances when you use it. Okay? Second topic is we cannot use React without a framework. This is something people have a lot of gripes about. But actually, if you talk to the community, a lot of people are using React without a framework. Client-side single-page applications. Who's using Vite and just React? Yeah, okay, look around. There's about, I don't know, like I'd say 12%, 13, 20% of this room. That's not a bad thing. At least that's my opinion. And I'm not, I don't work on React or anything, but sometimes you need to do that, and that's fine. In fact, I would go further and say that for tools like Quick, you can't do that. They are serverful only, okay? But let's look at this one post on X, formerly known as Twitter, by Andrew Clark from the React team at Vercel. He says this. He says, if you use React, you should be using a React framework. If your existing app doesn't use a framework, you should incrementally migrate to one. If you're creating a new React project, you should use a framework from the beginning, right? And I read this, and it's sound. But my immediate thought is, okay, but why? Why? Explain to me the mechanism. And he continues to do that in the thread. He mentions if you don't use a framework, you're probably going to create one without knowing you're creating one. And it's going to be one that you just make. And there's going to be edge cases that you maybe don't see. Whereas if you use something like Next.js or Remix, it's a community effort with thousands of contributors who are solving edge cases that you don't even know exist automatically, right? So there's benefits there. But I want to illustrate in our time together some of the things that frameworks do for you that give you huge benefits that maybe single-page applications don't. And so I'd love to show you that now. We have like 15 minutes, and the rest is just going to be code, frankly. So let's go to the terminal. And what I want to do is come over to this directory. So let me just kill all my running servers so we don't have port conflicts. We'll, sure, we can keep that browser going. We'll open the editor here. I have way too many VS Codes open at this point. Let's kill this, boom, okay. And we'll npx Vite. So what we're doing is we're just starting a client-side application, localhost 5173. Okay, so we have this. It's an application that does absolutely nothing. It's supposed to, /list is, I think, my endpoint. So we call the dog CEO. Anyone know the dog API? It's my favorite API of all time. No one? It's great. Yeah, one guy. Dog.ceo. Public API, no authentication, great for demos, okay? So anyway, we're calling the dog API, and we get a list of dog breeds here. We choose one, Beagle, and we get a little picture. Isn't that cute? And then we click the logo and go back, okay? This is okay, but this doesn't use a framework. And because it doesn't use a framework, if we look at the markup, there's absolutely nothing. And in case your user agent doesn't have JavaScript, this is what they get, right? This is a far cry from what JavaScript was intended for, okay? JavaScript is intended to progressively enhance a website, not to be a website, okay? So we've kind of missed the mark here. If you have a search engine visiting the site and that search engine doesn't have support for single-page applications, you just will not be on the search engine. It's a big problem for public-facing websites. Okay, so this is why we need a framework, because frameworks will render on the server side for you. They actually generate markup and give it from the server to the client. How do they do that? Let's implement a basic server to understand this. So if we come to our little project, let's look at the code first. So if we go to index, what do we see? We see hydrate root in the document, we render these components with a very basic router, right? If my path name is list, show me list. If it's not list, show me detail. So literally anything else will show me detail. Bit of a design flaw. So we have list. What is list? List is very simple. We have welcome to my dog site. You can see the direct mapping here between the right side code and the left side. We map through breeds, show links. We map through images, and in the background, you can see some images there. And we do this pattern, which is quite common, unfortunately, where you fetch inside use effect and then set state. Yuck. This is actually not, this is kind of an anti-pattern in React. But a lot of people do this because it feels natural, and this is probably one of the criticisms of React. You're not supposed to fetch here. The best place to fetch data in React is as early as possible, ideally outside the scope of your component. Ideally at the server level, but if you don't have a server, at least maybe in module, there's different places you can fetch. So how would we solve this problem with server rendering? Let's create a server. So I have server.tsx, it's empty, okay? We'll just write one. First we need React, we need we need render to string from React DOM on the server, oops. We need our app, probably we need list from pages/list. We need Express, right? We need a server. So and again, you can do this in many ways. I just like Express. So we'll say const app is Express. Okay. And what do we want to do? We want to listen. So on /list, we get the request and the response. And fundamentally, we want to res.send render to string list. So this function is given to us from React, but on the server side. So we're taking the JSX tree, turning it into a string, sending it over the network. App.listen 3000, and we'll just, sure, we'll do this. It's a very basic server. Let's see if this works. So we'll kill that, and let's do bun, actually. Oh, shit. Bun server.tsx. Oof. Bun is a faster node, FYI. So localhost 3000. What do we have? Cannot get slash, of course, because it's /list is our route, right? So we'll do localhost 3000 /list. And OK, we have it, but we don't have any CSS. We don't have CSS because we're not really reading from a static directory. So we'll app.use express.static, and we'll listen to the dist directory. We have some static CSS built there. So we'll do it again. And now we should have CSS. Do we have dist? Main.css is totally there. But I think, so what we actually need to do, this is kind of a hack. We need to send a full HTML payload. So HTML, come on. Wow, Copilot is really not cooperating with me. This is fine. And body, and OK. So again, we're just rendering our list here. We should maybe reference the style sheet. Anyone, let's link, right? Link, rel, come on. Oof, perfect. Is it index.css? It's main.css. OK. This is kind of what we want. I hope you're tracking with this. Perfect. We have CSS. Everything's great. The site isn't using React, though. And that's because we're not including React on the client side. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll just do a script src, and we'll just do /client.js. And indeed, we do have something in client.js in our built assets. OK? So we'll kill this, restart it. And now we should, so now we are using React. We're using the development build of React. One final thing is, I don't know if we're rendering into root. So there may be issues there on the client bundle. Let's take a quick look. We are rendering directly into document. OK, so. But I hope this is clear about why we need a framework. Because if we look at the markup now, there's actual text from the server side. There's not just script tags. But this still isn't an ideal solution for multiple reasons. Because here, on the client side, we have data. We're actually fetching data. We're not so much fetching data on the server side. The question is now, how do we do that? How do we fetch data on the server side? That's a whole other class of problems, right? Do we use suspense for data fetching? Do we use server components? The solution is actually to use server components. Anyone heard of React server components? OK, anyone using server components in production? One person. This dude. MVP, man. Let's talk. We have like 10 minutes. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about server components, but the underlying mechanism of how they work and how they interplay with server-side rendering. OK? And that will help us ideally understand it. I don't know if we can do this in 10 minutes, but we will try. So, and if not, it's fine. We can time travel. OK? So let's look at the code. This is kind of okay, but we just have one route now, list. And we also are not fetching data. So let's solve two problems at once. Let's solve the problem of file system-based routing that frameworks do for us. How we do that is instead of list, we just do a page. And we get the page from the request. So we can say const component is, we can dynamically import the module. So we await. Exactly, perfect. So we dynamically import this thing. And this is, by the way, why frameworks need your pages to have a default export. You ever wonder why in Next.js, for example, your pages have to be a default export? It's because the framework can then expect on the default export a component that it then interpolates into the server full output. Does that make sense? This is why. This is why frameworks have opinions, okay? So instead of render to string list, we just render to string component. And we can maybe get the props from query params, rec.query. So now we've gone from one route to many routes. And if we run our server, we should be able to see that. So if we come here, /list, /detail, I think it was called. Yeah, perfect. We have different markup on different pages. Okay, now how do we solve the data fetching problem? The server component problem. So this render to string gives us an HTML string. React components that are server components are async by default. So you actually don't have to use effective fetch. You can just like async await. So if we wanted to turn this into a server component, or if we wanted to turn the list into a server component, we would do it like this. We make this async. We get rid of all of this, breeds, and we'll just await fetch right here. Oof, beautiful. And then we can maybe get rid of all of this stuff, right? And we just show, we return this. Look at that. Our component becomes so much simpler as a server component. And we can just do that. This is the appeal of server components. We can do this because this executes only on the server and responds with JSX, a JavaScript object that React on the client side can pick up and render. Okay? But now we have a problem, right? If we go start our server again, what we'll see is, come here, we'll see an error, ideally. Yeah, we see a bunch of errors, but one of them is, gosh, objects are not valid as a React child. Found object promise. Promises are not valid React components. How then does server rendering work? Because any async function becomes a promise. In the interest of time, let's just skip forward. I was going to write this code, but I have it here in a branch. Spoiled. Yeah, cool. Stash. We'll go to this branch, and I'll show you the code. So this is the flow, okay? In server components, on the server side, and frameworks do this for free, by the way, you have something. So before you render to string, you create a React tree. Okay, what is a React tree? We defined a new function on the framework side called create React tree that just renders this, right? This is what we just did. We import dynamically the page. So we take this, and instead of passing it first to render to string, we need to go through the components and find the async ones and await them before we can serialize them to an HTML string and send them. That's kind of what we're doing here. Okay, so then what does this function look like? Create React tree. I wrote this. So it receives some JSX, as you can see. The argument it receives is this. Okay, layout, page, etc. So it receives some JSX. And if it's not JSX, if there's no JSX, we don't do anything. If it's a concrete type, like a string, a Boolean, or a number, we just return it as it is, because React knows how to render these things. If it's an array, like children or fragments, we recursively just call this on those children. But here's the fun part. If it's an object, React elements are just objects. They're objects with a schema type, div, props, and they have children. This is ultimately what React components are, okay? So if this is the case, if it's an object, then we check if the object has this property which says it's a React element, because we're only interested in React elements. Then, if the type of the element is a string, so if it's like this, we know that it's a built-in component. It's a div, it's a span, it's an HTML element. So we don't do anything here. We just recursively call the function on the props. However, if it's a function component, which may look like this, right? React components can be like this, other component, for example. That's a function. So if it's a function, then it gets interesting, because this can be async now. It can be like this. And so that's where, in this branch, we await, and we call the function with its props. Okay? And from there, we once again recursively go down and call create React tree on that. So all we're doing is going down a list of components, and if something async is encountered, we fetch the data, render it, await it, get some JavaScript object from it, and keep going. That's it. Once we have a thing, an object, a deeply nested object of components full of data fetched things, we hand it over to render to string. And render to string does what render to string does. It turns it into an HTML string. That's the flow of React server components. So you can use server components with server-side rendering. That's what's happening here. Or you cannot. You could just turn it into a JavaScript object on the client and send it to the client side. And then React on the client side picks it up. If this is a little bit abstract, let's just look at the final working demo. I think that'll just help bring everything together, which is if we run the server now and go back here, localhost 3000 list. I need to maybe set a header. I'm not used to the bun server, so we'll come, where's the, here, okay. Before we res.end, we'll say res.set header. Content type is HTML. That's kind of important. Let's come back, reload. Okay, so this now is data fetched on the server with server components. And you can see here a number of things, but what I want you to see is all the dog breeds, Airedale, Akita, they're all just here in the markup. And that's what frameworks help you do. But above and beyond that, if we go look at the actual server-rendered server components website, what we have is routing that is soft. It's not a full-page reload. So notice how this dog is spinning here. If I click into a breed, that should be smooth because data should be fetched on the React side, and it should send us some JSX. Unfortunately, we don't have time to create that. But actually, do we? We have 2 minutes, damn it. But it should, actually, no, it should work. Let's, I think what we need is a client-side function. That is, this actually looks like it should work. I don't get why it's not working. Let me see. Console. Let's quick, oh, okay. Unfortunately, we don't have time to get into that. But what's conceptually happening is, on the server side, we're fetching data, we're creating a big object, turning it into a string, sending it over. When we navigate in the page, what we're doing is we don't send HTML on the next page to do a soft navigation. We send an object to React on the client side, and React says, oh, I know this, because it's JSX. And then it just re-renders. Okay? It doesn't actually do a navigation, it just re-renders. All right, let's wrap it up. So what we saw was 2 things. One, how React can be as performant as the competition, things like Solid, if we're mindful about memo. We saw that React brings to us a component model that has been actually revolutionary, aka the good parts. And finally, we saw the value of frameworks. Frameworks that you can opt into, or that you cannot. You can just use Vite and do a single-page application if you want to. The criticism of you need a framework is not as valid as it may be for something like Quick, which will not work without a server side. Okay? These are some of the good ways that React helps us build some of the best apps of our lives. Frankly, some ambitious applications. Applications like Notion. Applications like Stripe. Right? Can you imagine these multi-billion-dollar types of companies built on React? And so my question to you in finishing this talk is, since React has done so much for us, what are we going to go from this conference and build? Thank you so much.